Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another session of ZEISS Conversations. We are here today on this great July afternoon, right before a long weekend. We're going to talk about headshots and portraits and how to get the most out of the frame, and working with your clients to really bring out their essence and kind of get on strange on the within the frame. Um, we're going to do things a little bit differently today. Rather than have an interview, we've invited one of our friends, Mr. Neil Van Niekerk. I hope that I got that correct, to join us
Close enough.
today. Close enough. For a roundtable discussion about how these terrific photographers that we have here today really kind of compose and put together the headshots and the kind of challenges that they come across from day to day. So welcome everybody. As always, you'll see on your left-hand side Mr. Kenneth Hines, on the right side Ms. Tracy Page, and in the center square there, Neil is taking up the helm. So welcome everybody.
Hey.
Ooh.
So like I said, it's more of a roundtable conversation today. Certainly those of you in the chat, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to drop them in and we'll do our best to get them answered. Neil, of course, is a pro photo legend of light, so we certainly have a lot of conversation we can do about lighting for the studio or lighting for in the environment. Tracy is an award-winning portrait photographer who works with a lot of film and film industry people. And then Kenneth, of course, is a portrait photographer doing some wedding and street and some other compositions as well. And all these together, I think, are going to give us a good conversation today.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have seen it, but Neil and I did a conversation, 3 years ago? Is that what you just said, Neil? On we did a video that's on his Tangents blog about headshots and our different perspectives. So we share a lot of taste, but we're different in how we get there. So we thought this would make a good conversation to kind of do a round two on our different perspectives on headshots. And Kenneth, I think, is going to moderate us and try to direct the questions a little bit.
I'm gonna try my best. I'm kind of gonna follow you all's leads because you all are really good together. So kind of like being that I'm moderating, I guess. I'll start with Neil since this is kind of our first time together here. Kind of talk about a little bit about what you do for your headshot work. I know you and Tracy kind of differ as far as the type of clientele work that you do in headshot. So tell us a little bit about what you do for your work.
I do a variety of work. I still shoot some weddings, portraits, all kinds of events. But I have a studio, you can see behind me here. I'm busy with some product photography. So it's a diverse range of things that I do. And then I do individual headshots here in the studio. But a large part of my work that I do is volume headshots, corporate headshots, where I photograph anywhere from half a dozen or more people over the course of a few hours or a few days. So there's interesting logistics involved in that. The difference between shooting in a studio where everything is here and I can just quickly pull it out and shoot, versus packing everything up and going to Manhattan. And like I said, the logistics can be challenging. So,
and do you do more so in studio or on location?
in terms of actual numbers, more in the studio. In terms of actual money in the bank, the volume work pays better, obviously, because it's more.
Okay.
And I think that's a great difference between us too, because I tend to do my headshot sessions, I might do 5 in a day, one-on-one, 7 in a day on a really busy day pre-COVID. And Neil will pack everything up and go to the location and sometimes do hundreds over several days, which is not something I've ever done. So it's a whole different world. I think I tend to be more immediate, more organic, less. Neil will take his lights and light everything exactly the way he wants it, where I'm moving in and out of the light. So we're totally different in the way we structure things.
Yeah, and I brought along a few photographs to show the setups that I use, and it varies from fairly simple to 5 lights that I set up. Very often it depends on what the client wants. If they have existing headshots, I need to kind of match the look as far as I can to match the branding, that it's consistent. And the other times it's just they want fairly simple portraits. So the lighting can vary. So I brought in some slides. You guys want to have a look throughout the program and see how I set it up.
So now one of the things I'm curious about is, I do a session over an hour with one client. How quickly, or when you're doing the big corporate volume work, how quickly are you shooting people? How much time do you allow per individual?
Well, in the email that I brief the client about how many people we can do, I usually say that 1 every 10 minutes is a very relaxed tempo, but we can do 1 every 5 minutes. I've done faster. So that's kind of the message that I give to them is 10 is really comfortable, but if you need to get a certain number of people done a day, we can squeeze it to 5. We can even do it a little bit faster.
Question for the both of you. So as far as what you all do, this is something that you all do every single day. Do you have like a base go-to as far as what your gear kit is, as far as what you're either taking or setting up for a specific shoot? Or does it change for everything that you're doing? As you said, Neil, for whatever that specific client may be requesting you to do? Or do you have like a set base that you start on and then build from that afterwards?
I can actually show you if you want. I can show you the 2 bags that I keep.
Sure.
Okay.
So while Neil is getting his bags, I shoot pretty
I'm
much
right here.
I have a Sony A7R4 with a ZEISS Otis 100 and a reflector, and that is primarily what I'm using like 95% of the time, those 3 items. So you can see the difference in the way the 2 of us work right there. It's just me, a camera, and a reflector with an assistant, of course, to hold the reflector.
Okay, so very briefly, I should make sure this thing doesn't pop open. I have 2 big roller bags that I take on a hand truck that I can push myself if I need to, if I can move the stuff around without an assistant. So in this one, I keep light stands, umbrellas, everything else that I need. So it's minimal amount of gear that I need to pack out and put in here. Because what happens is if you start pulling stuff out from different shelves and put it together, you are going to forget that one crucial connector, that one crucial cable. You're going to run into trouble. So I keep a basic kit here that I can pretty much just roll it out and I'm done. That is light stands, umbrellas, reflectors, all those kind of things. Then I have this bag. There shouldn't be anything in it at the moment, or not much. Think Tank Logistics Manager, which is empty right now. And with that, I have every pocket, every area in that bag is filled with something very specific, which I keep a list of in Evernote. And I have pro photo lighting gear that I keep in another roller bag. I'll pop it all out, all my transmitters. So it's very systematic. I'll pop into the other bag. So in a way, I do keep stuff ready. Mm-hmm. It'll take me 5 minutes to pull everything else together. And I use Evernote as a way of having all my notes and lists and to-do lists and everything else on me on every device. So I keep a list and I can just go through a checklist and go, yes, 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 I have that. But the basic kit that I have there, a big roller bag with the light stands, umbrellas, always ready. The lighting kit, I'll put it together. So there is kind of a standard set of gear that I roll out with.
Okay.
I keep a B2 and a stand and a couple of modifiers with me that I always have with me. And then I have a Nikon bag and a Sony bag, and they both have their controllers and parts and pieces. But I always have it with me just in case I need it. But like I said before, 95% of the time it's me, a camera, a lens, and a reflector, and an assistant. And that's pretty much it.
It really depends on what the client wants. We can even pull in a few slides now. Tony, pull in slide 1. I think that is slide 86. Slide 1. This I had to do during lunchtime of a conference where I had to quickly cram in a bunch of people. And you can see that it's a pro photo umbrella and one big 7-foot Westcott reflector. That's it. And then there's another light in the middle that you can see that just gives a bit of a spotlight effect on the gray background. That is it, just the 2 lights. Here I forego the rim lighting and the background light and the hair light and everything else and the full light. It's just, let's get this done. And that big 7-foot reflector, a little off to the side, the way it kind of scoops, it kind of gives you that light fill in from the side. But with a very simple setup like this, 10, 15 minutes, I'm ready to go. And it looks pretty good. And Tony, pop in slide 2. Obviously, shoot tethered to a laptop. In the studio, on location, or wherever I might be, I would say for the vast majority of times, I do shoot tethered. It's essential. I do pull in a client, have a look at the photographs, and it's nice that they can give suggestions as to what they want to change. They pick the photograph there or the photographs there. And this avoids that thing afterwards where they pick an image and then they're not happy because they didn't see the way their hair is or the collar is or anything else. So right there, they have a look, they pick the photograph. If they want to change something, they do it right then. And for the most part, it avoids that that thing, the regret later on that
we do something similar, but a little bit different because I'm not tethering directly to the computer, so they're not looking at them as I'm shooting them, but I'm sending them in sets to my assistant, and she's putting them on the computer. So as soon as the session is done, they're upstairs looking at the computer and making they're giving us their initial thoughts. So if there's anything that we do have to reshoot, we know before they leave. But so just slightly different, but so they're looking at their set. Usually I'll shoot 200 to 300 within an hour in 4 different outfits, and then they'll narrow them down and along with my assistant so that they can be sent to an agent, a manager, a publicist, an editor, or whoever's going to see the next part of the session.
That's also a pretty fast tempo there.
It is. It's really, because we do that's with clothing changes and makeup, hair, whatever has to be done. We do 3 to 4 setups in an hour per client. So we're pretty quick. And most of the images, I just want to kind of give you the precursor. Most of the images that we're showing today that Tony's running in the background of mine, very few of these have been edited. Most of them are straight out of the camera. The one that's on the screen right now, straight out of the camera. So no edits at all. I always say that, you know, I don't do a lot of edits. So today I decided to put my money where my mouth was and actually show my work unedited. So also, I've just switched to a Sony system. So all of the work you're seeing from me today has been shot on the Sony with a ZEISS Otis. So brand new system for me, and how we're getting it to work. I'm still making some adjustments and color and contrast, but these are all straight out of the camera.
So I shoot in groups of, not groups, batches of images of 5 to 10 photographs. And then I'll have the client come and look. So it's not like they look at every photograph as I shoot. And I most definitely don't want the screen there where they can see, because their eyes will go to it. You will lose them. So no mirror or anything. It's just me and them on the camera, talk, get their attention, and get the photograph. So between 5 to 10 images, 6 to 10 images in a group that I shoot in the big one.
I think that's a really important point you just brought up about the attention on you. And when you show them the tethered image or the back of your camera, or somebody else interjects into the conversation, you lose the attention on you. And Neil is famous for his demands of assistance, which I love because I pretty much make the same demands. But one of the things we're looking for is our assistant, our makeup artist, whoever is with us, parent, whoever's there, we don't want them interjecting into our conversation or pattern at all, because that distracts the client from their focus on us on our camera. So we're trying to maintain that relationship and get that image while they're in that moment. So that's another good reason why not to have the camera turned toward them so that they're seeing those images pop up, because then you're losing your moment.
I was going to ask you both about, communication, and how do you actually go about communicating with your clients once you're actually shooting with them? Because I'm kind of certain that they probably be a little bit different for the type of work that the two of you are doing. So how do you actually go about, connecting with the person that you're photographing and keeping that attention and capturing those moments that you
look at me? I'm your photographer now. That's a little joke.
No, it's true though. It's
anybody had seen the Tom Hanks movie, like, look at me, I'm your photographer now.
I get teased about having to be the center of attention, but that's exactly what's going on.
And I think it has to do with tone of voice and sounding warm and reassuring, light jokes, but you have to keep the flow going. But you also have to read the person. Some people like the conversation, sometimes you just have to intuitively feel how it goes.
Because I'm sure there are people that you probably have had that, you know, there are some that are naturals in front of the camera, and then you have those that probably don't take pictures that often, if ever. And, you know, how do you go about with those certain variations of people where, you know, you kind of have to work a little bit harder to really get a good photo out of a specific subject? Has that ever happened to either of you?
A lot. I think you'd be surprised. I mean, I work with a lot of actors and people who are used to being on the camera, in front of the camera, but they're not always comfortable in front of a still camera. And so what I have to do is engage them in a patter so that they forget that there's a camera in front of their face. And I make them react to me if I want them to be happy or sad or thoughtful or listening or attentive, engaged. Whatever I need from them, I have to make them react to me. So I'm always talking to them, telling jokes or stories or using keywords or key phrases. And some of my more experienced actors to actually get the emotion I want out of them, because they can't just pull it out of thin air. I actually have to talk to them, and you know, they practice different methods or method acting, and I have to kind of go in the same direction that a coach would. I have to pull out those same resources and tap into who they are as an actor and try to get that. Some of my actors have studied with Sam Christensen or somebody like Sam, where they have had their personalities boiled down to essences. So then it's key for me to be able to figure out what those essences are and repeat them in such a way that they can relate to it and then respond to that in front of my camera. And some of my actors have done the method acting where I have to emotionally take them wherever I want them to go to get that in front of my camera. So it's funny how much like an acting coach I almost become, and I stay really in touch with a lot of the coaches and what they do. And I even occasionally attend their classes or their webinars, so I can see how they're training the actors, because that really helps me in what I do.
And I always joke with other photographers that I feel like I have to be 50% a photographer, 50% a therapist. And I have to reassure people and just, you know, make them feel comfortable on the camera. And okay, one thing that just kills it for me, but you can never show it, you just kind of have to just roll over it and have the energy, maintain that energy, is when they tell you, I hate being photographed. Boy, that's what we start with. So it's sometimes it's tough kind of just breaking through that. And I have certain things that I say all the time, but I don't have a mental list that I run through that tell them. It's just off the cuff. You just kind of read a person and have a conversation. But I do think it's an important skill as a photographer just to have people feel comfortable.
Yeah, there's a question that good kind of segue in this from Deja Webster. She said, curious how you might have adjusted your routine during this time while being cautious, since clients can't wear a mask and need to keep social distancing. What are you both doing during this time to kind of give yourself that kind of distance between your clients now?
I am fully back at work. So this has been a lot of conversation about how we get back to work. But one of the things that I do is I shoot with the ZEISS 100, which, you know, that focal length gives me a little bit more distance between myself and my client. And I am, of course, masked while I work. It's uncomfortable. I'm getting used to it. It's the way that we have to do this now. So the client is not masked, but I'm masked. The makeup artist is masked and sometimes in a shield. But we are, you know, we're standing back a little bit more. I'm still cropping in camera, but that 100 focal length helps me do that.
Yeah, it's the same thing. I wear a mask and obviously keep a distance. Nice thing with headshots is you keep a certain working distance automatically. And I haven't done any corporate headshots yet since that time. So a few individual shots, headshots, and I do reassure them it's just us in the studio. So it's a big studio, 2 people. We're good.
Yeah, I've kind of fallen into it. It's surprising that during the pandemic, I'm actually doing portraits. I think that's hilarious. But I've kind of had Tracy there to kind of help as far as her going through her reopening, and that kind of helped in my kind of transition of what to do following certain protocols, and that brought about me using my 135 lens that I really don't use that often for portraits, as opposed to a 55 or 85. So you know, I'm masked just like you both are as well. So it can still be done. I think that's been a lot of concern for a lot of people as far as how do you actually go about, you know, still doing portraits, still going out there and working, and it's still a very doable thing.
Our biggest concern, surprisingly enough, because I don't think I fully expected it until they started calling and telling me, were my makeup artists. Makeup artists in our industry are still pretty much not back to work because there are so many concerns with what they do. We've had to make so many changes. We put in a UV system, UVC, for being able to sanitize brushes and cosmetic items. We've moved the entire studio around to give the makeup area more room so that people are not on top of the makeup artist or the client. My makeup artists are wearing shields. They're using disposable palettes and brushes, which, and I thought was pretty interesting. I went to an industry webinar on Saturday where the union rep was saying that makeup artists know how to properly sanitize the brushes. So she wasn't sure that disposable brushes are really necessary, because good makeup artists should know how to do proper sanitation, and that should be good. I've also had makeup artists telling me that they were declining to use hair dryers and do blow dries anymore. And then one of my makeup artists said she would do a blow dry, but she couldn't use a Dyson because it was 200 degrees cooler, and the hair dryer needed to be over 410 degrees in order to kill the virus coming off the body. So lots of things that I never thought I would even be thinking about. Now I'm thinking about details that seemingly had nothing to do with the immediacy of what I do, but now it's come into my workspace and my workflow.
Okay. Now I have a question for the both of you as far as when you're going about taking a headshot, what are the key things that you both kind of look for in how you actually go about composing your shot, the kind of lighting that you have? What is the ideal thing for someone that might be looking to do headshots for the very first time? What tips would you give them as far as, you know, is it how someone's shoulders are in a shot? Is it how their eyes are lit in the photo? What are some of the key things that you kind of would share with someone that's trying to do this for the first time? What to look for?
I think what you said last for me would be making sure that their eyes are lit and in focus. I think that's, you know, almost anything else can be fixed if you needed to. And watch your white balance. Make sure your skin tones are pretty accurate, because it's really hard to come back from a bad white balance. But those are, yeah.
Gosh,
Preach it,
yes.
right? Even if you're shooting raw, I think it's really hard to come back from a bad white balance. Thank you, Neil.
We still have that lecture.
So this is another way that Neil and I differ, is Neil does shoot everything in RAW, and he thinks that professionals only work in RAW. So we have this discussion a lot. Yeah. And I shoot everything in JPEG because my workflow is so fast, and I'm not making, you know, I want to make all of my decisions in camera, and then the images are gone from me. So I'm not editing RAW files later on. So it's a whole different workflow, but I get lectured every time we're together.
That's a good kind of segue, because, you know, that's kind of like a nice in-between balance for me here, as someone that does both, depending on what I'm doing. So what are your reasons?
I can't deal anymore.
Look, sorry, Neil. We have offended the Neil.
So the reason
I thought we were grown-ups here.
So I will do RAW and JPEG at the same time, because I want people to see what I have coming off the camera before I do any kind of adjustments. So for the both of you, why do you choose to shoot the way that you do? I know, Tracy, you mentioned as far as the timeliness for the work that you're doing, but what are the key things of why you choose to shoot JPEG? And Neil, why do you choose to shoot RAW? And what benefits do you see from doing JPEG as opposed to RAW? So Tracy, why do you choose to shoot JPEG? Neil, why do you choose to shoot RAW?
First thing I want to say is
14,
Neil,
14 bits.
when you give your answer, don't diss me, okay?
It's inherent in just saying 14 bits. The diss is built in.
I'm using a 61 megapixel camera. I mean, my sensor is huge. My files are huge. File management is I'm offloading images really quickly to an assistant who's pulling them up, and I don't want her editing things or adjusting things. If I shoot it right in camera, then and we're showing you today, I'm showing you my images straight from the camera, so you see what I get.
So for you, it's more about the accuracy
workflow
from the
and
start.
file management, and yes, if I get it right in camera, then she's good. And because I don't see the images for the first time out of my camera until I actually get edit requests after they've been to a manager, publicist, whoever's seeing them next. So, and I just sent 20 images, well, just sent before pre-COVID, I sent 20 images straight to my publisher without any editing at all. They were just the JPEG straight from the camera, and they ran them like that. There was nothing wrong with the images. They were good and clean.
Now, this presupposes that I have to edit a RAW file. I don't. My images out of the camera look pretty good because the white balance is good, exposure is good, everything is good. If I need a JPEG, I can extract the embedded JPEG with Nikon. With Sony, I can't because the embedded JPEG is around about 3 megapixels. It's tiny. So with Sony, I shoot RAW plus JPEG simply because I use a program like Photo Mechanic to sort and cull my photographs. And the built-in JPEG is too small. So I do shoot RAW and JPEG simply for the workflow there because of the Sony having a ridiculously tiny built-in JPEG. With Nikon, not necessarily because the embedded JPEG is large. On the occasions where I do need a JPEG from the RAW file, it is like 5 seconds to pull up a bunch of JPEGs out of the RAW files. The RAW files that I shoot look pretty good. They don't need much editing. Where it does come in and helps me a lot is if somebody has a very ruddy skin tone that's a little red, I'll pull down the red saturation. If I photograph somebody with dark skin, I'll pull up the shadow detail a little bit. Keep the exposure good, but we need a little more detail in the skin. So that kind of flexibility is just inherently better with a RAW file because you have the data. So for me, it's not about the megapixel count. It's really about the 14 bits that I can work with.
And the data.
And my workflow is faster with RAW than JPEG. It just is.
So it's kind of
I can fix ruddy skin from a JPEG. So I just use a little selective color and brush it in. Yeah, it's not. I mean, I really haven't. I switched to shooting JPEG maybe 5 years ago, and I haven't missed it. I found that all of the data, the 14 bits, was extraneous data that I haven't missed not having to keep up with.
Most likely, but I do need that safety margin.
I like to fly without a net.
Most of the times our headshots will be real tiny, and they'll go into a corporate website and it'll be like 100 by 100 pixels, or real tiny. So yeah, so we do shoot in excess of what the client will most likely use in majority of cases. That is true. But for my own workflow, the RAW workflow for me is faster.
Okay. And about, for a given job, how many pictures do you all generally take from one session?
In the studio here, I would do anything from 50 to 100 generally, depending on whether they have a change of outfits, and generally not more. A session in the studio is a leisurely half hour, maybe 45 minutes. On location, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. We shoot fast. I'll shoot, as I said, in batches of, or in groups of 5 to 10 images, and again until we're happy, but rarely more than 20 images per person.
Okay.
I'm generally shooting between 200 and 400 in a session. And then I have an assistant narrow them down to 60. So we deliver 60 in a gallery for the second round for agents, managers, publicists, etc.
Okay. I see someone came in, Icon sees I agree with JPEG shooters. I like to shoot and not have to worry about editing. If I really need to do something about the image or video, that's why I have filters. Interesting outlook on that.
Yeah, so I don't use any filters, and I don't use presets.
I don't use presets either. No.
Everything is pretty clean. So I have the advantage of usually when I'm shooting actors, you know, they have to look like they walk through the door. So other than removing some stray hairs that may be in the face or some skin flaws, you know, everything's pretty much as it comes out of my camera.
That's another.
Yeah, as I said, I do very little editing. Yeah.
So I know there are a lot of people, especially in my generation, is very big on editing and manipulation of their photos in Photoshop. And for the work that you all are doing, you're not doing any of that to your images.
I am. No, I am. I have once they've selected the image, I'll convert to a JPEG, and then I do stray hairs, skin retouching, and I do run two actions. The one is called shine off. It removes any kind of sheen on the skin, but I run it on layers, so I can always adjust the opacity. And usually it'll be about 50% that I have the layer on. It's really nice, easy to remove that bright sheen on skin. And I run portraiture, which softens the look. I used to run it at about, have it as a 3% opacity on the layer, but I've pushed it up to 60. It's a little too soft for my liking, but people seem to prefer it. And that's what I give them. So I do use those two Photoshop actions, shine off and portraiture.
And I do occasionally use portraiture also if I've got to reduce pore sizes, or if I just have a lot of things to fix, then I can just run that. But I usually scale it back between 30 and 40%.
So it's kind of still, you know, like correcting a few blemishes or things on someone's skin, where, you know, a lot of people they're changing characteristics of a person, you know, changing their eyes and placement of where their cheekbone or something may be, or changing out an entire background and all this stuff. And, you know.
Yeah, no, I can't. No, it's just not, there's just not enough time in the day. We like to have dinner with our families.
Yeah.
Valid point.
Yeah, it's just, you know, it's I guess it just depends on how you choose to. For me, I shoot better. If I pose them correctly, I don't have to try to slim 10 pounds off by liquefying. You know, it's just knowing how to pose a body so that you can get it at its optimum when it's in the camera, and then you don't have to do all that crap.
So when you're shooting, it's, as you're going about any shoot, I would assume that as far as your attention to detail has to be very high, because you don't want to have any kind of mistake that's there in the frame and then, you know, notice it later. So, you know, as far as what you're looking at and how you actually are going about a session, you know, kind of like how much time do you feel that you spend like making sure everything is perfect to a T in your frame before you take that shot?
I don't really. I think it's just practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I still occasionally screw up. There might be a bright light behind them that I didn't catch that's distracting. But I think a lot of it is just, and I'm sure Neil is probably the same way. It's just practice. You just, you know, we do this all the time. This is our business. So we're used to knowing that horizontal line that's cutting behind their head probably should not be there. And we just innately avoid it so that we don't have to deal with it later. But we're not spending a lot of my thought energy when I'm with a client is on their expression and engaging them, making sure that their eyes reflect some engagement and listening and attitude, or that there's something going on so that they can connect with the viewer. And I'm more concerned with that than anything else. And if there is, you know, stray hair, I've gotten mad at assistants who've stepped in and tried to fix hair. And it's like, you know, you cannot come between me and the client. That's just, you just have to, I don't care if you see it and it's driving you nuts. You have to just stand back and forget about it. And these are all, you're seeing these images, these are straight from the camera. There's no editing on these at all. So it's this is what we're doing as we're shooting.
And Tracy mentioned a very important point there, is keeping the continuity, keeping the flow, keeping the momentum. So even when I'm photographing and I'm doing a sequence of, let's say, 10 photographs, I won't stop and adjust, and I most definitely won't be critical of anything. I won't go, oh, that looks bad or anything. Everything looks great. And if I do any kind of adjustment to my camera settings or turn your shoulder a little bit or just something, it is an iterative process where the next photograph's just a little bit better. I never kind of just block it, stop it, and restart. You have to keep that flow going. So that's an important point.
My assistant is trained well enough that she will pick the best ones from a segment. And so the ones where my white balance wasn't perfect, or there was hair flowing across the face, or there was a little shadow in the eyes, she'll just not select those for the client to see. She can just take that out of the batch. So if I just keep going, she knows what to look for, and I don't have to worry about what makes it to the client.
So I have a question as far as when you're photographing headshots that I've seen with people that I've have had workshops with, or that I've met at the trade shows that we've done in teaching portraits. How important is it in terms of the aperture that you're using for the headshots that you take? And the reason I ask that question is because I see a lot of people who have sent headshots to me and they're completely wide open. But what happens in that shot, especially depending on how close they are to their subject, only a small region of their face is in focus and everything else is blurred. So how do you all go about, choosing what aperture to corresponding to what lens that you're using? How important is aperture for headshots?
Oh, it's so important. So for me, I like the eyes to be in focus, and I like the ears to be falling out of focus. So this is, so that the plane of the face is the main part of my focus. So, and it's changed as I've changed lenses. When I was shooting Nikon with Niekerk, I was shooting at f4 to get that same effect with the bokeh starting to fall off. And now with shooting ZEISS Otis, I shoot at 5.6. So my aperture range has changed, I think, pretty dramatically from f4 to 5.6. But now my foreground and my backgrounds can, be so smooth and creamy at 5.6 on the ZEISS Otis that gives me more focal plane to play with. But my ears, you can see in the image on the screen right now, my ears are still falling out of focus.
I think the difference comes in here that Tracy shoots more on location. And a more artistic crowd with actors. I tend to photograph corporate headshots, and the corporate culture always tends to be more conservative. So shooting at f1.4 and only the one eyeball is in focus, it's probably not going to fly. So I tend to shoot at f8, f11, occasionally 5.6. Occasionally I have to bring in background detail for a shoot. Or if I use the interior of the building as part of the background. And occasionally f4, but that's rare. Mostly it's f8, f11, everything's crisp. That is just what is required from those kind of clients.
And so I'm glad to get that perspective, because the two different examples here of photographers who are doing headshots, but they're not photographing their lenses wide open. If they have a 1.4 lens, like I know Tracy does with the ZEISS Otis, she's not taking those photos at 1.4. And in some of the photos that were being shown, you could still see, the detail in someone's jacket or their collar. And that's important to that person, I think, in the photos that you're taking. And especially being in a studio, with Neil, being that you just have a flat background where, he mentioned about Tracy being on location where you have things that are kind of adding to the composition. He doesn't have that going on in his shots, and for the type of work that he's doing, that's not the focus as far as what's going on in the background. That's why it's clean. It's just, that's it. That's all you have. And so it's really about the focus of the person.
Yeah, it's really about the end result and what the client expects. Yeah.
Always what the client wants. They have to definitely be the ones happy, for sure.
They're going to give me more work, so the word of mouth has to be good.
Yes, I have found also on what the client expects that it is incumbent on us to set the expectation of our clients. So I also, I try to give a lot of transparency to my clients about what to expect from our session, so that if there is something different that they need from me, that they have an opportunity to tell me. I try to say up front, hey, I'm probably going to chop off the top of your head, so just be prepared for that. I'm going to crop pretty closely, so there's not going to be anything else we can pull from. This is what you're going to get. And, but if I have a corporate client, I'll always ask them what their corporate standards are. So I know if I have to have a 10 to 20% space around the top of their head, that I'm prepared for that in advance.
Yeah, and I think I have one or two examples on the website where I've cropped and horizontal. The vast majority of what I shoot, the client wants vertical shots. So that's what I shoot.
That's another good, Tracy, I know you do kind of a combination of vertical and horizontal. Do you have a preference as to what kind of composition you do, or does it just depend on the situation that you're in, or?
I love horizontal shots. Personally, that's my preference, but some of the agents and casting directors still don't like them. So it depends on who I'm shooting for. So this again is where, I really know my agents really, really well, and my managers and my publicists, and I know what they're looking for. I've talked to them, I survey them occasionally. I ask them, what am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? If the client comes back and says, hey, last time we shot, my agent really didn't like this whole set of pictures, then I try to, at the moment I might look like I'm ticked off about it, but I'm really, later on, I take it back and I absorb it and I try to make myself a note. And I know exactly pretty much what the agents want and what they don't want. And that's, some of them just don't like horizontal and some of them love it. So it's always, in our industry, it's changed. So horizontal is okay now, where for a while it wasn't, because when we were doing printed headshots, everything had to line up in a notebook. So they wanted them to be able to flip over from one to another and be exactly lined up the same way. Now we don't do those printed headshots anymore. So horizontal shot isn't so in your face anymore. So I get away with it more, but I shoot both, and probably mainly vertical, but I like to insert my horizontal.
Now, most of my clients, the photographs are going to be used on a website. Then it has to fit whatever format they've chosen for the website, and invariably it is vertical. There's one client of mine in New York where they have a very specific design to the website for each of their lawyers, and the image is a 2:1 ratio horizontal. So they're very specifically shoot horizontal and make sure that I have enough room that I can crop and still have headroom above and below. So very specific composition, but they're very specific again about their request. But again, the majority, it's vertical, because the image is going to be used either in a square format or vertically on the website.
And I think that's where, you get those corporate standards up front, because I know when I shoot agents for State Farm, they want everything on a high key white background, because they're going to cut the background out completely, and it makes their clipping paths easier. So we just, if we know what we're doing, who we're shooting for, and what their needs are, then we can already have that taken care of.
Okay, give me 5 seconds. I just need to swap headsets. This one is dying.
All right. So I'll start with you, Tracy. As you all shoot, do you, if there's a specific type of composition that you might want to take, or do you go about at any point during a session and take photos that you yourself would want to use, or are you even allowed to do that? If you want to take a specific photo for yourself, are you able to do that and use it?
That's a great question. So it really depends on who the client is. I have some clients, like I think I put some of Chesley's images in this. We didn't do any. They're the images, Tony, that start with 3-5. So Chesley and I, every year, we always pick an outfit out of my costume area and we shoot it and do something fun after we finish her session. We shot her session this year in Atlanta, so we didn't get to do that, but that's just been kind of a tradition between the two of us. Then I have other clients, if you'll go down to the 7/7 series images, when we're working on her sessions, we're working very specifically for what she needs. This is working actress Kylie Karan. And, but she came back to my studio 2 weeks ago just to do these images. So this was all we did. We spent an hour just playing with this dress, and she loved the dress so much. She's actually having, hopefully it'll work, she's having it altered for her television premiere that's coming up for her new Disney show. And she's going to be wearing the dress for that. But so those were just, it was just a creative session just to be creative. So it really just depends on who the client is and where my head is.
How about for you, Neil? I'm not sure if you heard the question.
I kind of missed a part of that, Dave. My headset back in. So just repeat the question.
Okay. So have you ever had, during any kind of session that you've done, taken any photos that are just for you that you might like, but they're not images that you would deliver to a client?
Can't say that I really have, because the client will see whatever we pick on a photo of. So if there's anything that is different, it'll stand out, unless I tell them I'm going to try something different. But then I very specifically communicate with the client.
Okay.
I'm not sure that kind of answers the question.
I think you did there, because I was curious, because, you know, I've done some shoots, you know, and I might see the client might want a certain thing, and I'm like, oh, let me take this frame or something, if I'm allowed to do that. And, you know, sometimes I'm always curious as far as for what people are doing. Would they be allowed to do that based on whatever kind of client they might be working with, if clients are okay with that? Or have you even had situations where you've worked with someone and you want to work with them away from that particular project to do something that is on your own time, or something that is more the creative style, like Tracy was sharing, that you would want to do and share?
Not specifically in headshots. I had a client last year, her daughter is a dancer. So I said, let's go play around. Photo of little kid dancing. So that would be very specific outside of the headshots. In terms of improvising during the headshot session, I would do that with an individual client in the studio. Corporate client where we have 5 minutes or 10 minutes, there's just not that luxury. And again, it has to very much fit a brief. It has to fit within the specific look of the website and the branding. So there just isn't that kind of leeway to play. In the studio, individual client, I might try, hey, let's try this idea, I'll show them, and then maybe expand on that.
Okay, awesome. I think that's it for me. You got any questions for us, T-Dog, Mr. Tony?
No, I'm sitting here listening and learning. I know I try to, as I say all the time, in a sea of photographers, I'm the marketing guy. So I'm absorbing everything you're talking about. Of course, now, Neil, I'm going to have to go play with RAW over the weekend, and see a little different. Yeah, for me, it's always JPEG, because I can shoot it right to Instagram real quickly. But I'm trying to drive my compositions to a little bit more passion, a little bit more going on in the screen. So I'll have to play with that aspect as well. So I've learned something here today as well. So that's been kind of nice.
You know, I do tell anybody who is new photographer, learning photographer, I tell them to shoot RAW. I don't recommend shooting JPEG to people. I think that I made a decision 4 or 5 years ago to be able to walk the wire without a net underneath me, but I don't think that's the right decision for most people. I think until you're really confident that you're able to nail everything in camera, you should give yourself all that extra data.
Right. We worked with a photographer, Brian Leary, had a great comment about that. He says when you're baking a cake, if you have all the ingredients and you make the cake too sweet, you can go back and make it again. But if you just have a sweet cake, you can't really do anything. And that was kind of his description of the difference between RAW and JPEG. And certainly I need to practice now as well.
And I think for headshots, which is far more controlled than an event, shooting JPEG is a valid option. But again, for something like weddings where it's uncontrolled, you get different light sources, mixed light sources, and light values change. It gets a little tougher, I think.
Well, and it's a lot easier for me.
Safety net.
It's a lot easier for me to get an individual client back to my studio than it is for you to get 100 corporate clients lined back up again.
Oh yeah, no, certainly, yeah, I totally get that. So, well, awesome, everybody. I thank you for the arousing conversation and a little bit of the heated JPEG RAW discussion. We'll have to do that as a cage match next time.
Well, the funny thing is, Neil and I go through the same thing every time we're together. So
I think
it's been years.
I think it's even in that last email or that last video you were talking about, Tracy. I think there was some heated conversation then as well. But all great work, and certainly everybody has their own workflow, and that's the beauty of everything that we do. Is there's so many ways to create fantastic imagery, and it's great to hear everybody's nuanced styles on how they achieve what they're going for, and that's really the part that excites me. Well, I want to thank Neil for sitting in with us today. Great to see your studio again. Hopefully, I'll get over there sometime soon so we can have a chat.
Have lunch.
Yeah. Oh, that'd be terrific. And then thank you to Professor Hines for moderating today, and for Tracy Page, our other ZEISS ambassador, for giving some of her insight as well as to how she goes and creates and puts on screen. And then Neil, of course, your shots are fantastic, and really there's so much going on there. It's raw first, and then I'll have to tackle lighting at some point soon as well. So
let's have lunch.
Awesome. Awesome. I'll take you up on that. So thanks to everybody, and thanks to you for sitting in with us. We hope that you've had some fun here listening, and I see there was a bit of a heated conversation about RAW and JPEG, even in the chat, so that's great. I'm glad we got everybody talking. Thanks again for sitting with us. We've had a great conversation today. We'll have another one next week. Make sure to check our Instagram as well as our YouTube to see what's coming up next. Have a great weekend, everybody.